19 days before my wedding, my sister sent me a text that was never supposed to reach my phone. For words. That's all it took. For words to unravel 18 months of the most convincing lie anyone has ever told me. My name is Renata, and by the time I'm done telling you this, you're going to understand exactly why I now check my fiancé's, my ex-fiancé's, Venmo history like it's a crime scene. Let me back up, because this story doesn't make sense unless you understand how normal everything looked from the outside. I met Marcus 5 years ago at a co-working space downtown. He ran a small marketing consultancy. I was 2 years into my job as a UX designer, and we bonded over the fact that neither of us could get the espresso machine on the third floor to work properly. It was small talk. It was nothing. And then it was everything. The way these things sometimes go when you're not looking for them. He was thoughtful in a way that felt earned rather than performed. He remembered that I hated cilantro. He remembered my mom's chemo schedule 2 years after she finished treatment and still asked how her checkups were going. He cried at our engagement. Actual tears, not the performative kind guys sometimes do for the photo. I want you to hold on to that image, because it's going to matter later and not in the way you'd expect. We got engaged 14 months ago. I said yes so fast I embarrassed myself a little. My best friend Priya still jokes that I said yes before he finished the sentence. Here's the thing about my family that I need you to understand before I go further. We are a texting family. Not calling. Texting, constantly, all day, a group chain with my mom, my 2 sisters, Dana, the older one, and Beth, the younger one. That never really stops. Recipe photos, screenshots of dumb tweets, updates on my nephew's soccer games. It's chaotic and constant, and I love it. 19 days before my wedding, on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at work reviewing mock-ups, my phone buzzed with a text from Dana. It read, "He told her tonight." For words. No context. Clearly not meant for me. Clearly meant for someone else in a completely different conversation that had, through the special chaos of group chain group app confusion, briefly cross-wired into my individual thread with her. I stared at it for a solid 2 minutes, trying to make it make sense in any context involving me. He told her tonight. Told who what? My first thought, genuinely, was that it was about my nephew's soccer coach benching him. That's how far my brain had to reach to make this innocuous, because the alternative wasn't something I was ready to consider yet. I texted back. Told who what? Wrong chat. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then nothing for 11 minutes, which if you know my sister, who responds to text within 30 seconds even during her own child's birth, true story, ask her, is basically an alarm bell in itself. Finally, sorry, ignore that. Wrong thread lol. I would have let it go. I want to be honest about that. I would have let it go completely if it weren't for one thing. My sister has never in her life said lol unironically. It's a tell. A verbal tick she reaches for exactly when she's lying badly and trying to sound casual about it. So I called her. Not texted. Called, which we basically never do to each other during the workday. She didn't pick up. I called again 10 minutes later. Straight to voicemail, which meant she declined it or powered off her phone entirely. Now, I want to walk you through the next 6 hours, because they were, without exaggeration, the strangest 6 hours of my adult life, spent slowly excavating a version of my relationship I had genuinely no idea existed underneath the one I thought I was living in. I did the thing you're not supposed to do. I opened my location sharing app. Marcus and I had shared locations with each other since year 2 of dating, an intimacy thing, not a control thing, or so I'd always told myself, and saw that he was at a restaurant across town called Solene. A nice place. Not our place. Not anywhere we'd ever been together. A place I'd never once heard him mention in 5 years. I told myself, work dinner, client thing. I made myself a cup of tea and sat with that explanation for almost an hour, turning it over, trying to make it hold weight. It didn't hold weight, because he told her tonight doesn't attach itself naturally to a client dinner. Client dinners don't get forward warning texts from your own sister that get hastily retracted with a fake casual LOL. Around 7:40 p.m., my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a mistake. It was Beth, my younger sister, and unlike Dana, Beth has never once in her 26 years of life successfully kept a secret from me. Ever. She sent, "Okay, I can't do this. Call me right now. This is about Marcus." I called her from my car in the office parking garage, engine off, hands shaking hard enough that I fumbled the phone twice before I got it to my ear. What Beth told me over the next 40 minutes rearranged the entire architecture of my engagement in real time. Marcus had a daughter. A 4-year-old daughter named Josie, from a relationship that ended, according to what he'd told Beth's boyfriend at a barbecue 8 months ago after one too many beers, right before Renata and I got serious. The mother's name was Camille. And Camille, it turned out, had never actually stopped being in his life. Not as a co-parent doing pickup and drop-off logistics, which would have been one thing, a hard, complicated, but ultimately survivable thing to build a relationship around. No, Camille had been staying over at Marcus's apartment on the nights I thought he was at his brother's place in the suburbs helping fix up the basement. A lie so mundane and specific that I had literally never once questioned it in 14 months. He had a second apartment. That's the part that broke something loose in my chest when Beth said it. Not stayed at a hotel sometimes for work. An actual second apartment, a one-bedroom 15 minutes from his real place, that he'd been paying for since before we got engaged, where Camille and Josie lived, where he spent, according to Beth's boyfriend, who'd apparently known for months and said nothing because it wasn't my business to tell, 3 or 4 nights a week. I want to pause here and tell you what was going through my head, because I think it matters. My first fully formed thought, once the shock cracked open enough to let a thought through, was not how could he. It was the basement. He had shown me photos of that basement. Drywall progress. A half-built bar cart. I had asked follow-up questions about the basement. I had cared, genuinely, mildly, about a basement that as far as I now understood might not have existed at all. Might have been an elaborate months-long prop for a lie so specific it had its own visual documentation. I asked Beth the question I was most afraid to ask. Does he love her? Camille. Beth was quiet for a second. I don't know if love is the word. I think, from what Danny said, I think he never actually left. I think you were the thing that happened on top of a life he never fully closed the door on. 19 days before my wedding, I sat in a parking garage and learned that I was not the primary relationship in my fiancé's life. I was the addition. The second story built on top of a foundation that already had a family living in it. I called Marcus. He picked up on the second ring, breathless in that specific way people sound when they're mid-conversation somewhere loud. Hey, everything okay? His voice was easy. Normal. That's what got me most. How completely normal he sounded, like a man having dinner with a client. Not a man 40 minutes into telling another woman he was calling off his engagement. Where are you? I said. Not a question. A demand. A pause. Half a second too long. Grabbing dinner with a coworker. Why? Is her name Camille? The silence that followed lasted so long, I actually pulled the phone away from my ear to check the call hadn't dropped. When he finally spoke, every trace of casualness had drained out of his voice, replaced by something flat and careful, the tone of a man doing damage control math in real time. Renata, I need you to let me explain this in person. Please, not like this. You have 10 seconds to tell me if you have a daughter named Josie, or I'm calling the venue and canceling everything myself tonight. Another silence. Then quiet. Yes. I hung up. I drove home, not to our shared apartment, to my own childhood home, my parents' house, because I genuinely did not trust myself to be alone with him yet. And I sat in my mother's kitchen while she made me tea. I didn't drink, and I waited for him to show up, because I knew he would. He showed up at 9:15 p.m. My dad, God bless him, met him at the door and did not let him pass the entryway. What followed was 90 minutes of the most disorienting conversation of my life. My parents in the next room, technically giving us privacy, but absolutely not actually giving us privacy. While Marcus tried to explain something that fundamentally does not have an explanation that survives contact with basic human decency. Here's the shape of what he told me, stripped of the excuses he kept trying to wrap around it. He and Camille had broken up almost 2 years before he met me. That part was true. But 4 months into my relationship with him, 4 months, not the right before we got serious story he'd apparently given Beth's boyfriend. Camille had told him she was pregnant. He panicked. He didn't tell me. He told himself he'd tell me once things settled, and then Josie was born, and settled never arrived. And somewhere in that fog of panic and cowardice, he made the single worst decision of this entire saga. He decided he could do both. Build a life with me, publicly, the engagement, the wedding, the whole visible structure of a normal relationship, while quietly co-parenting and, it turned out, quietly staying involved with Camille far past what basic custody logistics required, keeping an apartment, keeping a second version of a domestic life running in parallel to the one he was building with me. I love you, he kept saying, like it was supposed to function as an explanation rather than an aggravating factor. That part was never fake. You have a 4-year-old, I said. You have had a 4-year-old for 4 years. You let me plan a wedding for the last 14 months while you had a child you never mentioned once. Not once, Marcus. Not a single time. He didn't have an answer that made it better. There isn't one. I've turned it over in my head for months since, looking for the angle that makes it comprehensible rather than monstrous. And the truth I've landed on is unglamorous. He was a coward who wanted both things and didn't have the courage to choose. So he let 2 women build separate, sincere, deeply invested lives around a version of him that only fully existed in the space between our 2 apartments. I ended the engagement that night, in my parents' entryway, with my dad standing 3 feet away, not even pretending not to listen. Marcus tried, for about a week afterward, to reach me, calls, texts, one truly unhinged 4-page email that I read once and never responded to. But I'd made my decision the moment he said yes to the daughter question over the phone. The logistics of unraveling a wedding 19 days out are, I want you to know, uniquely brutal. I called the venue and the deposit was non-refundable, obviously, though the coordinator, a genuinely kind woman named Teresa, who I will be grateful to for the rest of my life, waived the final balance once I gave her the short version and cried on the phone with her for 4 minutes. I called my caterer, my florist, my photographer. I had to call my grandmother, who is 81 and had already bought a dress and booked a flight from Arizona, and explained through tears why the wedding wasn't happening. That call took the most out of me, honestly, more than the confrontation with Marcus itself. The bridesmaids' dresses had already been altered. My maid of honor, Priya, told me not to worry about that she'd personally set every one of them on fire in her backyard if it would make me feel better, which did, actually, make me feel a little better, in the specific unhinged way only your best friend's willingness to commit light arson on your behalf can. I want to tell you about the part that still genuinely keeps me up sometimes, though, because it's the part that reframed the entire story for me. About 3 weeks after everything fell apart, Beth's boyfriend Danny, the guy who'd known about Josie for months and said nothing, finally told the full version of how he knew. And it turned out Camille didn't fully know about me either. Not the way you'd think. She knew Marcus was seeing someone, in the vague way you know an ex or a co-parent is seeing someone. She did not know there was an engagement. She did not know there was a wedding 19 days away. She found out, according to Danny, the same week I did. Marcus apparently made the decision to finally, actually end things with me that same week. That he told her tonight, my sister had accidentally texted me about was Marcus telling Camille he was calling off the wedding, not the other way around, which means the whole excruciating unraveling I lived through was already happening in parallel on her end too, just a few days behind mine. 2 women, both told a partial story, both quietly building an entire emotional future around a man who had already decided, somewhere underneath both of our backs, that he was never going to fully choose either one of us. He was just going to keep running both timelines until one of them collapsed loud enough to force his hand. I never spoke to Camille directly. I thought about reaching out, more than once, in the weeks after. I even drafted a message on 3 separate occasions. I never sent any of them, because I genuinely couldn't figure out what I wanted from that conversation. Closure, an ally, confirmation that she was as blindsided as I was, and I decided in the end that whatever I needed, it probably wasn't going to come from her. She had her own version of this to survive, and I had mine, and I don't think either of us owed the other one an explanation for something neither of us built. What I do know, through the same grapevine of mutual acquaintances that apparently exists specifically to keep you informed about people you're trying not to think about, is that Marcus and Camille are, as of a few months ago, back together, for Josie's sake. Which is a sentence I have complicated feelings about that I'm choosing not to fully unpack here. It's been 8 months since the wedding that didn't happen. I moved out of our shared apartment within 3 weeks. My parents helped me pack in a single furious, cathartic Saturday, my mom taping boxes while quietly narrating everything wrong with Marcus's personality that she'd apparently been sitting on for 14 months out of politeness. I've started therapy, which I'll be honest, I resisted at first, because some part of me felt like the humiliating part was already over and I just needed to move forward. But my therapist has helped me understand that the specific shame I felt, the how did I not see this spiral I fell into for the first 2 months, wasn't actually mine to carry. You cannot detect a second apartment through intuition. You cannot sense a 4-year-old through vibes. Someone who is willing to build that level of infrastructure to sustain a lie is not going to leave the kind of casual, careless clues that a less committed liar would. I think, more than anything else, about that forward text. He told her tonight. For words, meant for a completely different conversation, that happened to land in the one thread that could actually do something with them. If Dana's phone hadn't glitched, if the group chain hadn't briefly crosswired, if I'd just brushed off her LOL, wrong thread, the way a less suspicious person might have. I think about the version of this story where I find out on my actual wedding day instead, standing at the altar, or worse. I think about the version where I never find out at all, where I spend years building a life on top of a foundation that already had someone else living inside it. I don't think you can fully prepare yourself for how strange it feels to be grateful for the worst week of your life. But I am. 19 days felt like nothing at the time, 19 days of scrambling, canceling, crying on the phone with vendors, sitting through the most humiliating conversation of my adult life in my parents' entryway. And it was still, somehow, better than 19 days after. Better than 19 days, or 19 months, or 19 years after a marriage license made all of this exponentially harder to untangle. My mom said something to me about a month after everything happened that I still think about constantly. I was sitting at her kitchen table, the same table where I first heard the word Josie, picking at a plate of food I wasn't actually eating, and she said, "You didn't lose 14 months, Renata. You found out the truth in 14 months instead of finding it out in 14 years. That's not the same thing as losing anything." I didn't believe her at the time. I believe her more now, 8 months out, with enough distance to actually see the shape of what I avoided instead of only the shape of what I lost. I check my location sharing settings differently now, with anyone I date, not out of paranoia, but because I've learned that the specific kind of deception that survives 14 months undetected requires real, sustained architecture, and sometimes the only crack in that architecture is a wrong text sent to the wrong sister on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday. If you've ever found out the truth about someone through a text that was never meant for you, an accident, a wrong number, a slipped detail from someone who wasn't supposed to say anything, I want to hear it. I think there's something almost darkly funny about how many of us are walking around with a version of this story, saved from a future we didn't choose by the thinnest possible thread of somebody else's mistake. 19 days. For words. That's all it took to learn which version of my life was actually real.